At first sight, this looks just like any other tropical coral reef. But there are straight lines here which look strangely out of place, almost man-made. The veil of delicate red corals begins to fall away once we move out into the open water and start to move up towards the surface, past a forest of steel diagonals and girders, the supporting legs for the drilling platform of an oil rig. This giant complex lies about 25 miles off the coast of Brunei in the South China Sea. 100 feet of steel legs and girders is hidden beneath the water's surface. This field produces over 50,000 barrels of oil a day, but the platform has another role to play, which the oilmen certainly didn't plan. It provides a home for a host of uninvited guests. This crab, feeding on algae in the splash zone of the legs, normally forages over a rocky seashore where the waves are constantly breaking. But this steel shoreline does just as well. Barnacles usually cling to rocks, which take a relentless battering by the waves, sticking themselves firmly down with a glue which hardens over time. But the diver entering the water will come across far more exotic, unbidden guests than these common trespassers. An enormous man-made structure like this, sitting in the middle of the ocean, requires constant inspection and maintenance below the waves. Every diver learns to avoid the barnacle's razor-sharp shells as he plunges through the first 10 feet of water. The barnacles growing below the reach of the waves have become decorated with strands of green algae and pink sponges. Some empty shells have become safe retreats for nervous blennies, which dive for shelter as the diver moves past. White sponges compete for space on the barnacles, like a cluster of puffballs on a tree trunk. Even the hermit crab's portable shelter is the perfect spot for a homeless barnacle. A white blanket sponge covers the shells of goose barnacles, which still manage to continue filtering food particles out of the water with their feathery legs. Hawkfish normally live among clumps of hard coral. Their name derives from their habit of perching on coral heads, waiting for small fish or crustaceans to pass by, and then making a sudden swoop on their prey. These hawkfish are using the clumps of bivalves and barnacles in exactly the same way, clinging to the rough surface with spines on their fins. This region of the leg is also inhabited by butterfly fish, which nibble at small invertebrates among the barnacles. They pick them out with great precision, using the same techniques they use to pick out the polyps from hard corals on an ordinary reef. About 20 feet below the surface, sponges grow among red corals like eerie cobweb-covered candlesticks. At this depth, the sponges are competing with the dominant coral growing on the rig, a soft coral, which brings a touch of autumn to the legs. Soft corals differ from stony reef corals in two important ways. They don't build up a hard chalk skeleton as they grow, nor do they have algae living in their tissues. This allows the soft corals to be far more adaptable. They can grow in the cloudy waters of the rig because they don't need the high light conditions which the hard corals demand. A pufferfish moves down through the corals. If threatened, a puffer will suddenly inflate itself with water in the hope that this will deter predators. At about 40 feet, as the red coral begins to thin out, a sergeant major defends his eggs from hordes of the ever-hungry wrasse. Most fish desert their eggs after they've been fertilized, but the sergeant major takes these matters seriously. After persuading a number of females to lay eggs in his territory, he fertilizes them, and then stands guard over the developing eggs until they hatch. He will defend them against all comers. All over the rig, frantic fathers are driving scavenging fish from their eggs. It's surprising that any eggs survive to full development at all. rich community attracts schools of baitfish in from the open sea. The rig seems to provide a landmark in an otherwise featureless ocean. But such shoals aren't random formations. Each fish maintains the same distance from its neighbor by sensing the changing pressure waves traveling through the water, as well as guiding itself by sight. The clouds of fish confuse predators, which can't decide which individual to attack, rather like a child in a sweet shop which can't make up its mind. Batfish shoal too. These cloudy waters around the rig suit them perfectly, as they normally live in the brackish waters along mangrove-covered coastlines. They'll feed on just about anything. But all these shoals attract predators. Powerful horse-eye jacks glide between the bracings and tracery of steel, preying on smaller fish. Some predators, such as barracuda, have responded to the shoals of prey by hunting in loose schools of their own. This increases each member's searching efficiency, because each fish can take advantage of prey spotted by any of the others. But they're only brief visitors to the oil rig. Barracuda aren't the only predators to be attracted to the plentiful shoals around the rigs. On a calm day, native fishermen set out from local villages to go fishing near the oil rigs. They used to fish for prawns at the mouth of the river, but now it's well worth the longer journey to head out to sea. Other things have changed too. Until quite recently, canoes venturing offshore would be fitted with a sail and outriggers. Now the outboard motor has taken over. It's too dangerous to fish right alongside the oil rigs. Modern nylon lines don't rot and decay in the water as the old-fashioned ones used to. Tangles of lines which have been lost overboard could become dangerous traps for the divers working on the rig. So the fishermen set their lines some distance from the rig itself. Of course, shoaling behavior puts fish at an unnatural disadvantage when dealing with humans equipped with multi-hooked lines or nets. It makes it too easy. The fish, small jack mackerel, will be dried in the sun before being sold. The world's largest concentration of man-made reefs are the countless wrecks from the Second World War, which sank beneath the waves of the South Pacific. These attract large shoals too, and the wrecks are used by fishermen in the same way as these men are using the oil rigs. Far below the shoals, at a depth of about 50 feet, the red corals have almost disappeared. Their place has been taken by hydroids, colonies of polyps which resemble delicate ferns. These simple animals can grow in quite dark areas. In the darkest corners of all, black corals. Their branches are strengthened by a black skeleton of horny material, and the polyps cover this in a thin living layer. The skeletons of black corals are often cut and polished to make jewelry, which has made these corals increasingly rare. All these corals are filter feeders, opening their polyps at night and feeding on the rich clouds of plankton which float through the water, carried there by sea currents. Many are gelatinous, draped with intricate webs that serve as rafts to prevent them from sinking. The corals actively trap the plankton with the stinging cells on the tips of their tentacles. On a jutting buttress, a sea fan aligns its branches to the current so that it can present the maximum surface area. A reef community is unusual because so many of its inhabitants have the sedentary way of life forced upon them. Sea urchins, corals, hydroids and sponges are unable to move off the rig at all. In order to overcome this problem, many reef organisms protect themselves with venomous spines or stinging cells, rather as land plants protect themselves with thorns or poisons. The lionfish protect themselves in this way too. The stonefish feeds on prey passing just above it. For this reason, it's extremely well camouflaged, but it too possesses venomous spines along its back. Some of the bracings and struts form deep caverns. These provide refuge for shy creatures such as the octopus, which hesitantly emerges and then retreats as the diver moves past. The octopus doesn't react to sounds, but it has excellent vision, and it signals moods by changing its color. Pigment cells in the skin, called chromatophores, can be varied in hue. This octopus has changed to a pale mottled grey, indicating that it's frightened. This conspicuous display often gives an octopus away to fishermen searching for it. Finally, the diver reaches the seabed, about 100 feet below the surface. Blue damselfish hover over a grating in exactly the same way as they hover over spiky corals on an ordinary reef. But at this depth, the light is dim, and silt from the river often chokes life on the sea floor. One of the animals which can survive in these conditions is the sea cucumber, which feeds on all the accumulated detritus that has fallen to the bottom. But the seabed itself is barren, a graveyard for dead mollusk and barnacle shells. The oil rig is a biological oasis in an otherwise surprisingly unproductive tropical sea. At places, pockets of gas bubble up to the surface, indicating that a rich seam of oil is trapped below. That oil is the only reason why the platform is here. We have come ashore to look for the origins of the oil fields out at sea. The process of oil and gas formation still goes on here in the tropical forests of Borneo. Each year, the area receives 13 feet of rain. The water falls through the canopy of leaves to form small streams, which filter through the forest floor. The streams gradually join up and form large rivers, which sweep the forest debris down to the sea, past the swamp-loving palms. Soon, the water is a rich brown organic soup. At the mouth of the river, the silty water fans out into the ocean, dropping its load of organic matter, sand and silt, onto the seabed. This is eventually enfolded between layers of rock in movements of the Earth's crust. Pressure, heat, and above all time, convert the ancient deposits into oil and gas, trapped by non-porous rocks above. Once a new oil field is struck, the oil is burned off for a few days until it can be piped away. One routine task for the commercial divers is to clear away the encrusting life covering the seams and welds on the legs. The best way to shift the growth is to use a high-pressure water gun. A flag warns others that a diver is working below. At one time, it was believed that the marine growth increased the weight and surface area of the legs to such an extent that it created dangerous extra drag on the platform, so the entire leg surface was cleaned. But gradually it became apparent that the barnacles hardly increased the weight at all, and the soft corals moved with the currents, providing little resistance. Now, only small sections are cleaned at danger points where the covering of marine life might hide signs of damage. Experience also shows that the growth never builds up to a dangerous weight, but seems to level out naturally, once the colonization has reached saturation point. But the clean metal surface doesn't stay bare for long. After only a week, various algae are beginning to cover the surface. After 6 months, the leg is already covered by quite large oysters and sponges. But where does all this life come from? 80 miles further out from the oil rig, the seabed suddenly gets shallower to form a reef. It is far enough away from the choking debris pouring out of the river to lie in perfectly clear water. This is the distant nursery that provides most of the animal life that colonizes the oil rigs. Corals out here adapt their growth forms to changing light conditions and currents. A sponge vents sperm and eggs into the water above it. The fertilized eggs will soon drift off on currents to start new sponge colonies elsewhere. Maybe, if conditions are suitable, one of them might even land on the oil rig and settle there. The architect of the coral reefs is light. About 170 million years ago, the stony corals formed a unique symbiotic relationship with algae living in their tissues. These remove waste products such as carbon dioxide from the corals and supply them with sugars built up through photosynthesis. For this, they need light. Perhaps all the soft corals growing on the rig arose from this one individual out here in the nursery reef. Feather stars cling to corals, raising their arms in the current to catch plankton. And the endless variety of shapes provide shelter and hiding places for fish. Parrotfish feed specifically on the algae beneath the stony coral polyps. The crown-of-thorns starfish devours the polyps on the corals. Blue damselfish hide among the branches of a stag's horn coral, just as they hovered over the grating on the rig. Other fish dive deep among the coral branches to hide from predators. Another obvious gap in the variety of life on the oil rig is the absence of anemones and their partners, the clownfish. They shelter from predators among the anemone's poisonous stinging tentacles, protected by a thick coat of mucus. The fish may bring small morsels of food to the anemone in return. Each species of anemone has its own matching species of clownfish, and every clownfish recognizes its own particular anemone chemically and never mistakes it for another. Anemones, too, have a symbiotic relationship with algae, which is probably why they aren't to be found on the oil rig either. The floor of a coral reef is always covered with fine white sand. But the main difference between this coral reef and the one on the platform is the crystal clear water. Off the coast of West Africa, another company is drilling for oil in a completely different ocean, the Atlantic. In the first few feet, the marine growth on the legs looks remarkably similar. But as we move further down, it soon becomes apparent that a completely different species of coral has won the battle for living space. It is well known for its ability to grow in dark caves and overhangs on Atlantic coral reefs. This is probably what gave it the advantage and allowed it to dominate the legs of the oil rig. It too opens its brilliant orange polyps like miniature burning suns to feed at night. A familiar-looking blenny peers out of its barnacle in alarm as a poisonous bristleworm crawls past its home. The combinations of fish found on the oil rig are fairly random. Many juvenile fish have such unspecialized habits that the growth of the community is merely based on who gets there first. The speckled coral trout accidentally swims into the lair of a moray eel, which is having its daytime rest. Annoyed, it rushes out to see what's going on. It normally only emerges at night to feed on crustaceans and small fish. A large moray adult can be dangerous if provoked, but a working diver is only at risk in very cloudy water when he may accidentally put his hand into its lair. Of the 32 species of surgeonfish, only 4 are found in the Atlantic. The bright yellow mark in front of the tail fin indicates the position of 2 movable compressed spines, resembling a surgeon's scalpel. Like most other reef inhabitants, it only uses these spines in defense. The South American coastline on the west of the Atlantic is far richer in coral species than this African coast. Only a few species can disperse across the large distances to reach the more impoverished eastern regions. But it's possible that some coral larvae may have come on currents from as far away as Brazil. This part of the Nigerian coastline is a mangrove swamp. There are no coral reefs among the muddy waters along the shore. But the oil rig stands far enough out to sea to avoid the worst of the sediment and provides a suitable landing stage for any coral larvae from other reefs. The largest visitor to the platform is the grouper, a member of the sea bass family which can reach 700 pounds in weight. There is no record of a grouper attacking man, despite its enormous mouth covered with row upon row of inward-pointing teeth. The grouper is quite territorial, and as it feeds on the larger fish around the platform, its presence here is an indicator of the rich and varied community which has grown up around the oil rig. A community which man unwittingly has helped to create and can now enjoy. It seems that our search for black gold beneath the oceans of the world has brought us unexpected natural wealth of quite another sort.
You'll be unsurprised to hear we've more wildlife at the same time tomorrow with a look at the devastating effect man has had on coral reefs.